お待たせしました。履歴書を拝見しました。佐々木さん。
So, here we are in our ongoing series where I look at the Like a Dragon franchise through a careful lens. More recently, my descent into madness as series writer Tsuyoshi Furuta makes me want to pull my hair out, if I had any left. Some of you are already clicking away, but the rest of you, I wonder. Do you watch these to hear me break down the series in a way you never thought of before? Or are you holding out for the day I emerge from the Like a Dragon mines, tears in my eyes, singing its praises yet again? Why are you here? Maybe you just like my karaoke, huh? Tsunaoni, I love you. Todoke yo kitto you love me. Tutawaru sa kimi ni au garasu no kutsu wo sagasou. Futari de step and go. Itsumade mo shinyo 12を過ぎたって僕らのラフ街はWell, try to please everyone and you'll make nobody happy, and I aim to disappoint. Fact of the matter is, there's a lot I like about Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, and there's a lot I don't like about it. Probably more of the latter than the former. And somehow, if I had to give it a score, it'd sit somewhere near a 7. Are they gone? Have I satisfied the weirdos who need to hear me say I like the game? Good. My issues with Infinite Wealth don't stem from an awkward English dub or poor prose. Not in any major capacity anyway. No, it's deeper than that. Deeper than crappy plot twists or lame minigames, which we'll get into. But when we get to the deeper reasons for how I feel about Infinite Wealth, I ask you to hear me out and walk with me as I examine what Infinite Wealth is saying with a critical eye. For now, why don't we start with something easy? Like a Dragon 7 was a brand new genre shift, featured a brand new protagonist, and was RGG Studios' attempt at ushering in a new age for the brand. Many in the West would find Ichiban Kasuga a breath of fresh air. He was spunky, he was upbeat, and he had a heart of gold. Like a Dragon 7 did pretty well, reportedly selling nearly 2 million copies as of writing this, with most of those sales coming from outside Japan. I praised it for successfully converting the brawler fighting of Yakuza into a turn-based RPG system, having a cohesive experience detailing and describing the new protagonist through gameplay mechanics and features, and hitting us with meaningful storytelling, while also getting our hopes up about the way the series handles its representation of certain people, despite tripping over itself here and there. I also criticized it for its rough around the edges implementation of said turn-based RPG system, particularly the job system, which was pretty flimsy and lacked the sort of depth I look for in RPG job systems, and thought it needed some polish, a little more player control, and small quality of life changes. But this is how it goes for Like a Dragon. Usually, the first implementation of a feature, whether it's a new fighting mechanic, another map to explore, or a big minigame, ends up being rather rudimentary in the Like a Dragon series. It isn't until its second or even third iteration when said features are at their best, having been given the proper development time to get much needed changes or upgrades. We've always stressed development timelines of Like a Dragon titles are a poison on their overall outcome, and this was no different. So whenever another one is announced, we look forward to seeing those roughly hewn carvings sanded down into attractive sculptures. Infinite Wealth is RGG Studios' sophomoric dip back into its turn-based RPG system, this time sporting improvements over the last. 7's largest weakness was its focus on positioning without any tools to manipulate it. Characters would tiptoe side to side or dash in one direction or another, and often ruin an ideal moment to drop an attack targeting multiple enemies in range. Positioning was mostly up to luck. Those are executive producer Hiroyuki Sakamoto's words, not mine. In an interview with Games Radar, Sakamoto stressed the following: when developing Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, we believed that luck shouldn't be so strongly pushed, and we dialed back the emphasis on it, instead focusing on giving more control to the player and giving them more opportunities for exploitation. Talk about taking advantage of an unintended consequence of your fighting system. Fighting in Infinite Wealth revolves entirely around unit positions. You can freely move your character around within a radius to line attacks up better. Positioning yourself near weapons will have your character pick the weapon up to attack their targets with it. Getting behind an enemy triggers a back attack, which deals bonus critical damage, and getting up close and personal activates a proximity bonus for your attacks. You might not have realized this, but these small additions are a continuation of converting the action of the Yakuza series into the turn-based system of Like a Dragon. In this case, context-sensitive attacks. While heat moves became essence abilities different characters had access to in 7, the nature of activating a heat move didn't really exist. The special conditions you had to satisfy in order to activate a heat move influenced the way we played the Yakuza games. 7 lacked this influence over players and didn't have compelling reasons for us to perform fights in certain ways. It was a fairly straightforward instance of DPS rushing everything as fast as possible with your strongest hitting abilities. But Infinite Wealth's added emphasis to positioning brings back the feeling of dragging an enemy to a specific location or setting yourself up to unleash a ton of damage onto them. These are all ways players interact with enemies. However, Infinite Wealth also expands how party members interact with each other during fights as well. As your bonds with your party members grow, they'll begin to execute additional attacks beyond just the regular follow-up attacks from 7. Positioning the active character next to another party member will initiate a powerful combo attack capable of knocking down the enemy. Knocking an enemy back into another party member can trigger a combo chain for critical damage. These tiny inclusions to the fighting system end up becoming late-game godsends. Infinite Wealth fully expects you to take advantage of where everyone is standing, weighing the benefits of taking on an enemy alone versus trying to combo them into someone else, and maybe even send them careening into an explosive barrel or other part of the environment. Abilities have various new ranges and modes of attack to take advantage of this new emphasis on positioning. Attacks going in straight lines but increasing in damage the greater the distance they travel, attacks with area of effect circles growing or shrinking depending on the tier of the ability, and cone attacks going out in a wedge-shaped area, to name a few. Abilities also have new attributes detailing how they affect enemies on contact. Knockback abilities will push enemies in the direction indicated by the glowing arrow, and grapples are necessary to break a defending enemy's guard to maximize damage. Rather than shoot for complexity in the sequel, RGG focused on creating more interactions between the player, the environment, their party, and their enemies. Even basic attacks can create a chain of mayhem as an enemy is bounced back and forth between the party and then executed by a follow-up attack. Players have more freedom to strategize how their turns play out, and thanks to the added control can do more than just select abilities from a steadily overwhelming list or match type weaknesses. Infinite Wealth even implements heat in the form of tag team attacks. Party members build up a tag team meter by utilizing those special attack conditions. Once the meter is full, they can execute a special attack that does large amounts of damage or targets a large swath of enemies. While it isn't heat exactly, having a system built off of performing attacks well with your party members is a strong echo of the heat system from previous entries. A reward for being efficient in fights, making you exponentially stronger the better you are at building the meter. Special conditions for abilities and basic attacks can stack, allowing players to cleverly double up on advantages against enemies. For example, using a weapon attack behind an opponent to also gain the back attack bonus. This, of course, stacks with knockback effects, which could trigger a chain attack by a party member, which could knock an enemy into a volatile part of the environment, which could then be followed up by another party member, resulting in a satisfying spectacle of damage. Spectacle is the key word here. While Like a Dragon 7's combat system was simple and easy to wrap our heads around and features some excitingly animated special moves, the all-around presentation was fairly limited to those. Infinite Wealth's fighting system is a proper return to the series' focus on fighting spectacle. It gives the control over said spectacle back to the player. We create the chaotic, brutal fighting we remember fondly from the series' past in Infinite Wealth. All the while, the system is kept simple and approachable for players of all creeds. However, while Infinite Wealth adds a wonderful set of layers to its fighting system to make it much more dynamic, it still suffers from the same fundamental issues found in Like a Dragon 7. Inconsistency is still a huge problem in Infinite Wealth. Sometimes an attack registering as a back attack won't give you the bonuses for it. Other times, the system doesn't know whether or not to care about enemy positioning. Characters still move away from spaces you confirm them to be in for abilities. This is extra frustrating in Infinite Wealth because it has indicators of where an ability is going to hit rendered inaccurate if the character gets stuck on a piece of geometry or is too close to another character model. Party members will dodge forward or sidestep right before their ability goes off and drastically change the trajectory of their skills, even though part of Infinite Wealth's whole shtick is players having more control over their positioning. More control until the game decides a character shouldn't be there, I guess. And because enemies and party members alike still walk back and forth and shimmy side to side in battles, lining up attacks can be somewhat of a headache. With positioning being even more important now, it becomes especially frustrating when you're lining up an attack that targets a long range in front of your character, only for enemies to sidestep out of the way before you hit the button to confirm the attack. You might consider this a feature, where you're rewarded for acting quickly by being able to catch more enemies in your range. But it's only true at the start of the fight when they're organized in neat little rows. As battles go on, enemy placement is more haphazard and dependent on how you've shuffled them around with attacks. There's nothing in place to guarantee enemies are going to group up, which is good, but it's clear RGG Studios isn't asking players to act quickly. It's pretty obvious this is an unintended consequence because it's easy to cheese enemy placement by pushing them physically with your party members and tricking the game into walking them around. Infinite Wealth is a turn-based RPG centered around positioning and weighing your options, but its enemies still move around like they're part of the old brawler-style fighting. I think it's this schism creating the fundamental issues I have with Like a Dragon's turn-based fighting, even though Infinite Wealth is a much better and more exciting iteration. The job system is back, full of the same issues it had in 7, and then some, but admittedly has one improvement I enjoy. As opposed to inheriting specific crossover skills from each job, party members can now assign up to 5 inherited skills from all of their job abilities. This results in fewer usable skills overall, but a greater pool of available options to be weighed when job switching. But pretty much everything I had an issue with in 7 is still present here, minus stats not carrying over, which I was plain wrong about in my Like a Dragon 7 video. Whoopsie! Once again, the unique job every character starts with is infinitely more interesting than any of the generic jobs you can assign them. Only now, stat increases carrying over from one job to the next are backloaded on each job, meaning some intense grinding is necessary to grab the trifling amount of stats you can gain. Seriously, why am I going to level up Geodancer to 50 just for 5 points in magic or whatever? Without any advanced classes to build towards or decent stat gains to earn from job switching, we once again find ourselves switching to other classes to pick up elemental abilities and other melee types before funneling back into the unique classes, providing us with unique abilities we can't get anywhere else or on anyone else. And here's where Infinite Wealth ends up creating a huge imbalance between party members. Not all unique jobs are created equal in Infinite Wealth. By which I mean, one in particular is way cooler. Kiryu's Dragon of Dojima job outshines them all due to how many layers of mechanics they gave it. Kiryu has rush combos as a proximity bonus. Kiryu has a counter for perfect guarding. Kiryu can style switch to change the way his basic attacks work. Kiryu can activate Dragon Resurgence and change the game into a brawler for a short period of time. Kiryu gets access to heat moves if he's standing close enough to a part of the context-sensitive environment. Kiryu can do all of these things as Dragon of Dojima, and none of the other party members, not even Ichiban, can do anything of the sort, or have equivalent mechanics built into their jobs. Playing Kiryu as Dragon of Dojima is way more entertaining and interesting, not to mention more viable and efficient than any other job or party member in the game. This is a massive imbalance where most of the depth is front-loaded onto one character and the rest of the group is relegated to a smattering of generic jobs that don't come close. And if this was done to make Kiryu seem larger than life mechanically in order to complement the way he's viewed in-universe, it's a terrible decision, making the fighting system worse off. I loved the improvements made to fighting in Infinite Wealth and enjoyed chaining and stacking attack bonuses together. The ability pool is stronger given the added traits they have, and the limited skill inheritance leads to more interesting play rather than having access to a huge list of automatically inherited skills. Unfortunately, the reality is most of the fundamental issues Like a Dragon 7 had in its fighting system are still present in Infinite Wealth and continue to plague it. And this worries me for the future. Infinite Wealth is the second turn-based RPG title in the franchise and has built new additions on top of a less than sturdy base. I really don't want to see more changes and additions until the gaps in this base are filled in with something stronger. Because every entry we go without solving those core issues is going to feel more frustrating to play, and it's going to be harder and harder to solve them the more features we stack on top. I'm a big fan of environments with lots of things to interact with inside of them, and RGG's Honolulu City fits the bill. You can greet passers-by on the street to raise your social stats, items are littered all over the map to pick up on your way from one place to the next, mini-bosses are scattered about guarding treasure chests and small explorable areas, giving us a reason to remember places we can't access and come back to later. The new Sujimon battle mode has various Sujimon raids and trainers in key locations with respawn timers so you can monitor when and where an opportunity to catch or train more Sujimon will occur. Enemies show up in fun ways too. Slamming trees to find coconut men, walking through a sandcastle to fight sand monsters, and once in a while having a sports car drift through a corner to ambush you as you're crossing the street. You're constantly doing something in Infinite Wealth or gaining something you can use elsewhere, and I like it. My gripes with Hawaii's overall design in Infinite Wealth has to do with little limitations and small features we didn't see a bigger emphasis on. Swimming is barely present. You jump into the ocean once or twice either for a sub-story or the initial curiosity, and then you more or less stay far away from it, because there's nothing out there worth doing. And Hawaii seems rather big for what's available in it. Sub-stories are spread pretty thin, mini-games are concentrated in specific choke points rather than sprinkled around the map to stumble into as you walk around, and all those little trinkets and items you can pick up while you're traveling start to feel like they're there to fill up empty space where nothing exists. What makes the most use out of the map are party talks you can have with your group, which are appropriately placed in specific areas and actually get you to wander into a part of town you wouldn't have otherwise. But then, there's nothing to do in those parts of town when you get there, so you just leave after. But what about all those mini-games you can play? Yeah, about that. The mini-games of Infinite Wealth have an issue with scope. I think they stretch themselves a little thin on Playspots this time around. A minigame smorgasbord isn't uncommon for Like a Dragon titles to have. It's been the series' bread and butter for the last few years. Lost Judgment, Yakuza 6, heck, even Gaiden had a selection of what I call involved minigames. Minigames beyond the batting cages or darts game you can find in the series. Ones with mechanics or extensive rules. Meaty minigames you can almost see as their own standalone experience. Almost. Infinite Wealth has so many of these minigame candidates, but they all suffer from sharing the space with one another. Crazy Delivery is an updated take on the bottle collecting game from 7, only now with a Crazy Taxi twist. Sicko Snap is a parody of Pokemon Snap where you take photos of perverts doing weird things. Mismatch is a dating minigame involving lying on your dating profile to impress people who may or may not be catfishing you and has terrible dating advice. And the two colossi of this Playspot roundup are the Sujimon League, a Pokemon parody where you train up enemies you can befriend to battle against other Sujimon trainers, and Dondoko Island, an Animal Crossing parody complete with island and home customization and crafting elements. On paper, this sounds great. You've got a huge selection of side content to have fun with. RGG Studios was really proud of Dondoko Island in particular. They brought it up in almost every interview I could find, claiming it was a game within a game and had enough content packed away to justify a standalone release. But this isn't truly the case. In fact, the further into Infinite Wealth's Playspots you get, the more obvious their lack of depth becomes. Crazy Delivery only features a single map and 3 difficulty options and gets repetitive rather quickly, kind of like the actual Crazy Taxi. Sicko Snap only has 3 short-lived levels. Both of these minigames feature a point system expecting you to play through its limited options extensively for rare items, but don't support long-term play. The half hour you can squeeze out of either is negligible in the grander experience Infinite Wealth provides. Mismatch is incredibly repetitive, consisting of trial and error, constantly changing up your dating profile to attract the person you haven't flirted with yet, and is embarrassingly dry. The more Sujimon League you play, the more you realize it's a pretty bog standard gacha game without any real thought required for winning in it. All it takes is a strong enough Sujimon and half decent type matching, and then you can more or less ignore all the extra features of it. Sujimon raids just aren't worth the time when you can gacha pool a super S-rank Sujimon that's going to mow down the competition. And once you complete the sub-stories tied to the Sujimon League, it disappears from your purview entirely. There just isn't enough content related to the league to make it a main staple of the experience. Dondoko Island is where you feel this the hardest. It begins as a really fun Animal Crossing clone with quality of life features I wish New Horizons had, but dwindles down into a really disheartening nothing of a minigame. You have to raise your island satisfaction level to progress, which involves placing down furniture items around the island for guests to interact with, but eventually you realize the easiest way to do it is to plop down the dirty rundown buildings. You keep waiting for Dondoko Island to eventually reward you with actual tropical themed or varied furniture items to really customize the island's look, and it never happens. Your getaway vacation destination ends up looking like a piece of Kamurocho was cut out and airlifted to you. And it sucks, it's boring, it's not interesting. You have all these neat mechanics for a life sim game gone to waste. Unless you like office furniture and grimy city districts in your vacation paradise. Then you realize it's all just a further asset reuse of their existing buildings and objects. Asset reuse doesn't make it bad on principle, but this was advertised as a tropical island destination where you could build the resort of your dreams. I'm not doing it with pachinko parlors and the gross buildings from the city. Playing through these minigames, you sense, had there been fewer of them, more resources could have been devoted to making the ones left over better. Dondoko Island could have been more refined and given better decorations to play with. The Sujimon League could have been bigger or featured more mechanics to round out the gameplay system it currently has. Sicko Snap could have gotten more levels or had more interesting levels or actually used Sujimon interacting with the environment in a way that made sense for them instead of these generic pervert models. Mismatch could have been more risque and weird and kinda gross. Crazy Delivery could have had an extra map on the island or two, maybe even had levels in Ijincho and Kamurocho. But as they are, these minigames feel like they're missing something essential to what makes a Like a Dragon minigame like Pocket Circuit Racing timeless. By now you're noticing a back and forth I'm having with Infinite Wealth. An oscillating opinion overwhelmingly obtuse and obfuscating any overt feelings I have about it. At least, this is how I hope I'm getting across. The truth is, Infinite Wealth confuses me. I'm not exactly sure what it wants to say, nor am I certain of how I feel about it, narratively speaking, I mean. There's large swaths of Infinite Wealth's narrative I really enjoy. There are numerous standout moments reminding me of why I enjoy this series in the first place, many of which revolve around Yutaka Yamai. Yamai is my sweet baby boy, the drop of honey in my tea, he's got the jumper cables to my heart, and he's the battery. Yamai is reminiscent of Like a Dragon narratives from the past, a solid anti-hero character who begins as a one-off villain. Every new encounter with Yamai develops his character a little bit more, either by showcasing his unorthodox resourcefulness, expanding on the relationship he has with his subordinates, or highlighting his exchanges with Ichiban. Our opinion of Yamai changes over the course of Infinite Wealth, until we're eventually rooting for the guy. This change in perspective on the character coincides with an effort the narrative makes to draw parallels between Yamai and Ichiban. Both have their ragtag team of misfits and both have strong moral compasses that lead them into trouble. Add a running gag with an actual payoff about Yamai always feeling cold, bookending his character arc, and you've got a classic Like a Dragon character. One with motivations and goals, with his own reasons for helping our heroes, with a complicated history marked by his existence in the underworld and the injection of humanity exceptional Like a Dragon characters possess. But every now and then, in between certified Yamai moments and serviceable story beats helping us understand our characters and pushing the plot forward, he shows up. It's obvious by now, I don't particularly like the storytelling qualities of one Tsuyoshi Furuta, but I'd like to make a clarifying statement. I don't know for sure if what I take issue with in Furuta's writing is up to Furuta at all. Despite being credited for script writing and storyboarding on every Like a Dragon title I do not like, I'm not 100% certain Furuta is to blame for those problems. And despite having read interviews where Yokoyama credits Furuta as the sole writer on certain projects, who knows? Maybe he has an understudy or assistants who handle parts of the writing so he can focus on more major scenes or whatnot, and they simply aren't credited for their work. However, what I do have is a collection of patterns in recent RGG Studios products Furuta is credited for writing. There's a consistent, always present way of telling a story in these games, and what connects them together is their credited writer. Infinite Wealth has 3 writers, and depending on how you look at it, could be a good or bad thing. On one hand, too many writers can create a confusing story, as everyone has multiple ideas for how a story should be told, and having too many hands trying to push the story in different directions can cause a narrative mess. Too many themes fighting for dominance, plot lines starting up in the middle of other threads only to never be resolved, things of this nature. On the other hand, and great for me, this is a perfect opportunity to examine Infinite Wealth's narrative for those familiar patterns and see what happens to them when Furuta isn't the only person in the writer's room. If they're fewer and farther between, then Furuta being the source of those patterns is a pretty decent assumption. If anything, having 2 other writers on the project might rein in those Furuta-isms, if you will, especially considering one of those writers is Masayoshi Yokoyama, the second original writer for the series and now head honcho at RGG Studios. I've got separate gripes with Yokoyama's style of writing, namely how he writes women sometimes, but I've never had an issue with his general ability to tell stories. The guy can open and close a book just fine. This being said, he's also just credited for original story on this one, meaning the general premise is Yokoyama's, but it's more likely that our main writer, Kazunobu Takeuchi, had more overall control over the actual script. Takeuchi is somewhat of an unknown entity, but has been a design lead on Like a Dragon titles since number 4, and since the remake of Ishin has been more exclusively credited for story-related roles. I don't have much else to say about him other than new writers for the series are always welcome. As you'll see, I'm pretty tired of them using the same writer for everything. Furuta's annoying narrative faux pas are kept in check in Infinite Wealth, or more likely his relegation to assistant scriptwriter means there's less opportunity for Furuta-isms to show up in the narrative, but they do still show up. What exactly is a Furuta-ism, you ask? Well, we can actually list them for you. Whenever the dialogue suddenly stops to drop a piece of trivia, fun fact, or statistic about what it's talking about, often incorrect or misleading. Whenever the dialogue between 2 characters turns into a PSA-style discussion on a specific subject matter, such as Alzheimer's or bullying. This is usually an actual plot beat in the story and is full of bad information. Scenes where a character will explain everything the audience was just shown, or in place of having a scene where we are shown a character doing things, essentially breaking the show don't tell rule of the visual art form. A scene designed to explain some facet of the story that also adds dubious claim to said explanation in order to absolve itself of making an explicitly canonical event, in other words, lampshading, and supernatural elements never explained with the audience expected to go along with it. The opening to Infinite Wealth is full of these isms, with a cutscene where a character we will never see again painstakingly explains the way he stole several items, even though we just finished watching him do it and know exactly how he did it. It has Ichiban awkwardly explain the 5-year ex-Yakuza clause almost to the camera itself, and spends way too long fleshing out tertiary characters we aren't going to see again, instead of using this time to show us more of Ichiban's current situation or that of our previous party members. But as we move past the initial setup for our plot and Ichiban lands in Hawaii, a lot of my gripes with Furuta's writing are noticeably absent from the narrative. Infinite Wealth begins to resemble a Like a Dragon title, with strong character moments establishing who the party is, a plot moving forward rather than meandering in place, and a healthy amount of escalation capitalized by this momentum. Every now and again, however, those issues will pop up in certain places. The convoluted explanation of why there's an underground mall underneath the existing mall that's an exact replica of said mall where department store executives buy knockoffs of real designer brands that are made with official tools from the design brand factories, which would make them identical and therefore not really knockoffs so much as stolen wholesale, only for this explanation to serve nothing as this underground mall only shows up during this segment and never comes back into the main scenario in any meaningful way? Why is that here? Why do we have this? Characters waste time by pointing out obvious questions the audience can answer through the apparent magic of context clues and inference. This doesn't happen as often as it did in either Judgment game, but still creeps in here and there. Small, inconsequential plot holes are painstakingly listed and filled in. It's a waste of everyone's time and again is a sure sign the writer lacks confidence in their storytelling ability. What makes this especially jarring is coming away from Infinite Wealth with a completely different characterization of the group we're adventuring with. Whenever Ichiban or another party member interjects with a one-off statistic, whenever they stop to point out tiny inconsistencies so that the writer can make excuses for them in-universe, they stop feeling like the people I knew from Like a Dragon 7. They suddenly come across as cardboard cutouts of who they are, a poor facsimile of who they are supposed to be. This caricature of these characters permeates throughout Infinite Wealth. Ichiban, previously showing a knack for catching his enemies off guard with carefully laid traps, is considered a fool for most of Infinite Wealth. Kiryu, who time and time again learns the life lesson of not doing everything on his own, is once again learning the life lesson of not doing everything on his own. Saeko, previously the independent, takes no prisoners life of the party, is completely obsessed with Ichiban and his proposal to her. And this is where the portrayal of various people and concepts begins to fall apart. This series has never portrayed women well, but you could have told me Like a Dragon 7 was going to be the beginning of change. Efforts, however small, were made in 7 to improve its depiction of women. Saeko felt like her own character who was motivated to join the group for her own reasons outside those of our other protagonists. Infinite Wealth takes characters like Saeko and Sung-hee and turns all of their attention towards the men in the party. Saeko's entire existence in Infinite Wealth revolves around her being Ichiban's love interest, and most if not all of her dialogue is about Ichiban, his proposal to her, and whether or not she should have taken him up on the offer. This romance subplot feels completely out of nowhere and doesn't add anything to this story aside from a confusing string of cutscenes where Ichiban is lectured by Nanba of all people on how to talk to women, only for Saeko to enable Ichiban's behavior shortly thereafter. If you were paying attention in Like a Dragon 7, this is odd when you consider Ichiban has a fitting backstory and shows off behavior indicating he knows better. It's a weird role reversal apathetic to the continuity of these characters. It also turns Saeko into nothing else but a romantic interest for Ichiban to fawn over instead of, I don't know, a character who wants to be around to support her friend? Maybe instead of shoehorning in this romance subplot at the very start and doing nothing with it until the very end, we could have been shown a growing romance between the two characters over the course of the main scenario, which would have capped off with a proposal at the end. You know, like a story would? Maybe we should have been shown these two characters having feelings for each other instead of just being told they did. Sung-hee doesn't fare much better. This badass underworld crime boss turns out to be a huge Kazuma Kiryu fan, which is fine and a neat background detail I can enjoy in isolation, but not when it overwrites any and every opportunity for us to learn more about her. Not even the new addition of the group, Chitose, gets away from the writer's insistence every young woman in our story be head over heels for our protagonists. Even Chitose needs a small subplot about her unrequited love for Ichiban. The women in Infinite Wealth purely exist to empower the men, to admire them, and honestly, it's not what I wanted when I played Like a Dragon 7 and thought, hey, I want to see more of these characters. On the topic of wanting to see more of familiar characters, it doesn't mean I don't want anything new from the series, a problem I think RGG Studios needs to address in its storytelling. This franchise has become largely self-referential, and I think it needs to start telling more original stories rather than rely on previous story elements. What was originally an attempt to pay homage to previous Like a Dragon entries has become an inability to tell Like a Dragon stories without drawing parallels to or bringing back elements from previous titles. I think this more recent trend in the series is being spearheaded by Furuta's contributions. To be frank, Tsuyoshi Furuta cannot write an original story to save his life. His strongest qualities as a writer is creating climactic moments and rising action. Furuta knows how to write a scene to make you cry or get you pumped for an upcoming gameplay segment. At the very least, they are successful in a vacuum. If we ignore the steps he takes to get us there, he can spin a pretty good moment of triumph or hard-hitting emotional scene. But as we discovered when covering Lost Judgment, Furuta has a bad habit of using the same story beats and the same narrative spikes in his work, to the point it gets comical, where characters are doing the same exact thing in the same exact way it was done in a previous game. Recycling story beats can be fine if you're paying respects to previous entries or going for a metaphorical recap of the series, but when overdone, stops being a fun nod to the past and starts bordering on self-plagiarism. At some point, you're no longer doing an homage, you're copying and pasting the same crap you've written multiple times onto a new Word document. This ranges from small and annoying inclusions like giving a character in Yamai's subplot Alzheimer's as a lame attempt to call back to Judgment, to bigger, lamer retreads like tying our central villains in Infinite Wealth back to Bleach Japan at the last minute to somehow call back to Like a Dragon 7. From tiny, irritating mentions of bullying meant to bring in the themes of Lost Judgment, to grander, ambitious inclusions like drawing a parallel between Lani and Haruka for Kiryu to have more motivation than he already needs to save the day. And to add insult to injury, these threads and callbacks don't go anywhere meaningful. They're largely dropped onto our laps without ceremony and then forgotten about for the sake of other details. It's as if Furuta is slapping us in the face with previous work and expecting us to point at the screen and shout, "I know that reference! I know what game he's referring to!" Just as likely, it could low-key be Takeuchi choosing to ignore Furuta's contributions to the main scenario as best as he can. Except these are meant to push the story forward. They're not secondary details we can ignore, they're big main scenario reveals meant to make us gasp in shock and pull us deeper in. But I've seen it all before. I'm not as engaged with it as I was the first time, and in some cases, I was never engaged with it at all. It makes me worry about the future of this series. Is every Like a Dragon game going to bring some dead character back to life? Are they going to constantly bring up Bleach Japan instead of moving on and creating a new group to represent something different the series wants to talk about? Are we never going to move on from the Yakuza despite the series going through all the trouble it has to effectively remove them from center stage? Will Ichiban's future stories always revolve around Arakawa's dealings? And if so, will we ever see him do or face anything truly brand new? Is Kiryu ever going to die? Or are they going to cart him out into the spotlight whenever Japanese sales drop too low? This is obviously a completely personal take on the matter, but I'm so exhausted by the repetition in this series, and I really hope they get some new ideas soon. Also, the writing is all over the place in general. Characters who get set up in Infinite Wealth with subplots are discarded once the narrative needs to wrap up as best as possible. Wang To, leader of the Ganju, has his son kidnapped by Palakana and is then unceremoniously shot in the stomach and proclaimed dead. Infinite Wealth then forgets about his kidnapped son until the final leg of Ichiban's section where the party goes, "Oh yeah, what about that kid? Oh, here he is, problem solved then." Akane, Ichiban's freaking mother, who's the entire reason we're in Hawaii to begin with, gets one nice cutscene with her son right before the end, and then is never heard from again. And if you're a Gaiden fan, I bet you felt pretty burned by Hanawa's sudden death by random NPC in cutscene number 47. Imagine all this buildup, all this mystery they surrounded the character with, only to off him in 2 seconds with barely a finger lifted in the plot. Just an aside here, this is what happens when you simultaneously develop 2 games which are supposed to somehow relate to one another. Whatever, they'll probably bring him back in Gaiden 2 or something since nobody stays dead in this series anymore. But this is all unimportant in the grand scheme of things. I couldn't care less about the usual issues I take with a Like a Dragon title. Those are going to happen whether or not I want them to, and I've learned to live with them. What I constantly struggle with in my journey through the series is the theming and messaging each entry possesses. Like a Dragon says some messed up stuff sometimes. Other times they say really heartfelt things. Many times they are saying both in the same breath, which is where all the discourse comes from. Some people only focus on the heartfelt messages, and other people can't see past the nationalism, the xenophobia, the misogyny, etc. To be perfectly honest, I don't blame them. I think Infinite Wealth is trying to say something without being held accountable for saying anything. I think it either doesn't know what it's saying, is being deliberately confusing in order to get away with saying something controversial, or is doing both in different areas. This is difficult to explain in respect to the narrative as a whole, and makes more sense if we break down some of the potential themes of Infinite Wealth into smaller problems. At first glance, Infinite Wealth may seem like it's trying to say something meaningful about the living conditions in Hawaii, or about corporate interests trying to have its way with it, and there's good reason to believe this is what it's doing. Characters make isolated comments about the quality of life in Hawaii. There's a short conversation between the group about rent being excruciatingly high, with the only solution seeming to be taking multiple jobs just to afford to live. I can't remember more examples at the moment, but I'm giving Infinite Wealth the benefit of the doubt and assuming there's more of the same somewhere in it. The central plot of Infinite Wealth revolves around outside interests attempting to take advantage of Hawaii's location and assets to rid themselves of a problem by putting it in the vicinity of and endangering Hawaii locals. To really drive the message home, the villain of this plotline, a white man appropriating the faith of the Hawaiian people, is the one masterminding it all for the sake of having control over the islands themselves. But before we decide to applaud Infinite Wealth for this pretty obvious analogy to cultural appropriation and solid take under the eyes of post-colonialism, it's important to ask a question I haven't seen many people asking. Which Hawaii are Ichiban and his friends protecting? For all the effort Infinite Wealth makes to tell us a story about Hawaii coming under fire from foreign interests and imperial rulers, it largely ignores the indigenous people of Hawaii. Infinite Wealth's general focus on Hawaii never leaves the cushy, comfy tourist traps and attractions plaguing it. The sub-stories we encounter in Infinite Wealth with potential to discuss the life in Hawaii beyond tourism amount to cultural appropriation at best, and at worst completely ignore the culture in favor of showing us another tourist attraction. The jobs in Infinite Wealth relating to Hawaii are the caricatures of bastardized Hawaiian traditions tourists love to eat up and parade around as though they're learning something spiritual about real Hawaiian culture. Your party members will put on tribal masks and do tribal dances for some of their abilities. The central locations of Infinite Wealth aren't communities or neighborhoods where we get to see how the tourism aspects of Hawaii get in the way of day-to-day life. They're shopping malls. They're gentrified beaches and hotel districts. But above all, it's the language used by our characters most damning Infinite Wealth's faux sensitivity here. Despite all the effort it makes to talk about how Hawaii is being taken advantage of by imperial power, it talks about Hawaii in terms of paradise, as if all these tourist attractions and stores and cheap thrills are what's in danger of being eradicated. It's as if Infinite Wealth is saying, of course we have to save Hawaii. Where else are we going to vacation? Ultimately, Infinite Wealth tells a story of people trying to protect corporate interests in Hawaii from different corporate interests in Hawaii. It's shaking the hand of the problem while telling the people watching them do it that they can't stand the guy. It's dressing up its story to look like it's sticking it to the man, but in reality, it really loves what the man is feeding it. Infinite Wealth's depiction of a cult brings with it more questions than answers as to what exactly it wants to say about it. Once again, an initial observation would indicate an admonishment of the in-game cult, until we take into account certain key decisions made by the script writers. Infinite Wealth succeeds in establishing how dangerous cults can be. Fanatics will do anything for their leader, who manipulates them into his enforcers and sleeper agents. This naturally allows the cult to install themselves in many facets of society to push their goals, usually goals which serve the cult leader's own interests. These fanatics are willing to do anything for the cult. They'll kill for the cult. They are stripped of their humanity for the cult. This indoctrination can turn into an infection, where members will pull in family and friends, even children, into the cult. The younger, the better, as it's easier to convert and brainwash children into the cult's teachings. Infinite Wealth depicts the obvious evils of a cult with aplomb. Bryce is shown to be ruthless and cunning, with agents everywhere suffocating our heroes every step they take. He turns children into literal soldiers to carry out his plans, and most importantly, he's shown to have deeply ingrained his cult into the politics and society of Hawaii. Bryce and Palekana are a picture-perfect example of what happens when a cult is allowed to spread its influence over the course of 70 years without interference and showcase the very real dangers cults represent. But Infinite Wealth seems to have done a much better job than intended because it doesn't completely admonish the cult for what it is. By which I mean, Infinite Wealth takes the time to point out that the cult isn't all bad, without seemingly understanding those elements are exactly how a cult manages to spread in the first place. This isn't about people who fall victim to cults, which Infinite Wealth does a good job discussing, There's a great scene where the surface level members of the cult, people the cult uses to prop up its various fronts, realize they might be part of a cult and are lost on what to do next. Without any guidance, they simply continue to exist within the cult, doing what they've been tasked to do. This is a really good example of what can actually happen to people in cults. The loss of direction, the uncertainty of what to do next, and the slow relapse into the familiar entanglements of the cult. This is about infinite wealth not comprehending what it is about cults that makes them so nefarious. Cults don't pull members in through their secret motivations to take over governments or the promise of eliminating any and all who stand in their way. Cults spread through the humanitarian efforts they use to attract members. Food drives, fundraisers, you name it. Nobody joins a cult thinking, I would like to kill people in the name of some holy spirit and/or the person leading this organization. They join them based on the quote-unquote good things the cult is doing. Those humanitarian fronts are inseparable from the cult itself. This is how they trick people into joining them, by making them think they're making a difference, and maybe they are, but they're doing it in service to the cult and ultimately in service to the cult's true motives. Infinite Wealth seeks to divide the cult's workings between good people in the cult and bad people in the cult. Tomizawa, one of our party members, is used by the writers to stress how important Palakana's work has been to the people of Hawaii. He claims their soup kitchen helped him during trying times. Tomizawa even goes so far as to say he's going to continue helping Palakana at the end of the game. In another scene, a character we're supposed to like and agree with, a character the players are expected to align themselves with, refers to the cult as their special place, even after it's been revealed to be a cult. Infinite Wealth wants us to think that not all parts of a cult are bad, that the sense of belonging a cult uses to retain members is valid and positive, and I'm a little confused about why. Why would anyone go through the efforts of trying to make this clarification unless they were trying to defend the workings of a cult? Some might say, well, Palakana in-universe wasn't always a cult, so it's fine to delineate what the organization used to be versus what it is now. But the thing about cults is, they're cults. Once a cult becomes a cult, those nice things are no longer the actions of someone who means well. Those are recruitment drives, opportunities to indoctrinate others, community outreach programs to create smoke screens that allow you to get away with more sinister acts. The organization is no longer salvageable. It shouldn't take much effort for us to use any real-world examples of cults to confirm this. Imagine if a real-world cult decided to say, yeah, we're not a cult anymore. See how many people believe them who aren't already in it. At any rate, in-universe, Bryce has been in control of Palakana for 70 years. If your religious organization has been a cult for 70 years, then none of the characters in our story have ever seen the cult not be a cult. The scope of the story has never seen the cult not be the cult. For all intents and purposes, Palakana is a by-the-book cult. So it becomes increasingly strange that Infinite Wealth would go to the lengths it does to stress that the cult has redeemable qualities to it. It's especially concerning considering Like a Dragon's previous takes on cults are pretty solidly in the they are bad all the way down category. Again, the question I have for Infinite Wealth and the writers behind it is why? Why go through the trouble of defending parts of a cult? What is the purpose? What are you trying to say? I don't think they would have an answer for me. I think this is one of those elements of recent Like a Dragon narratives where they're trying to establish every discussion as a both sides issue, where Like a Dragon refuses to say anything concrete in favor of remaining vague so as not to upset anyone. But who exactly are you avoiding upsetting by trying to give the cult kudos? Probably the most confusing discussion in Infinite Wealth revolves around the concept of online outrage culture. A discussion Infinite Wealth opens up by canceling its protagonist via social media and showcasing how it affects not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. Effectively, Infinite Wealth supplies a negative connotation to cancel culture, calling it out for its toxicity, its ability to spread hatred for an individual and their loved ones, and describing how destructive it is to their livelihoods and ability to fend for themselves. Infinite Wealth highlights the persecution of individuals who have been called out via this method, showing Ichiban being hounded by what we are to assume are online influencers trying to capitalize on his cancellation for views. I have to tread carefully here, because this plotline can be easily misconstrued to be something it's not. You see, this isn't just about cancel culture. If it were, it'd be easier to dismiss as a case of old men yelling at clouds. It's also about the spread of misinformation on the internet, and how quickly people are to believe what they've been told. However, this misinformation is attached to what is essentially a drama channel's calling out of a specific individual. So while, yes, you could interpret this as the general dangers of spreading misinformation, you would be ignoring the context of how and why that misinformation is being spread. That is, to damage the life of a specific person. This is also one of those cases where knowing where this is from is important, because you could also say this is a commentary on blacklist culture and the lengths Japanese society goes to blacklist people who have done certain things like drug possession or having ties to shady groups without there necessarily being evidence of it. This is a very favorable interpretation of the writing, however, because of how Infinite Wealth wraps this plotline up. Despite its statements about online media harming the livelihoods of individuals who are called out on it, despite what it says about outrage culture and blacklisting people based on misinformation, it's the same source of this misinformation who ends up saving the day in the end by weaponizing cancel, outrage, blacklist culture, whichever one you want to call it, against one of Infinite Wealth's final bosses. If Infinite Wealth were making a statement about how online influencers and call-out posts can be damaging to a person's life, then in its final moments, it's also saying it can do good as well. If this was about the public perception being easily manipulated into believing whatever it's told, then the ending to Infinite Wealth stresses that the public should be manipulated into believing whatever it's told, so long as it's beneficial. If this was about the dangers of blacklist culture, then this ending would also be saying blacklist culture is fine if the person actually did those things. So what ends up saving the day against cancel culture and drama channels is cancel culture and drama channels. It's essentially saying, yes, cancel culture and outrage culture is bad unless it's telling the truth. Which, I mean, duh. But Infinite Wealth implies the more common reality. The core issue we should be focusing on with this sort of culture is the majority of these callouts and reports harm innocent people. Infinite Wealth isn't just saying callout culture can be bad, it's saying most of the time callout posts are bad. This ignores the fact that, in the real world, people who are usually called out on social media tend to be called out on doing things we would consider a criminal or reprehensible act. They are often men, and very often they're called out by their victims. To imply these victims could be lying is not only a disregard for their well-being, it's a knee-jerk reaction built on paranoia and oftentimes misogyny. But that's just my extra personal take on it. I digress. What I'd rather focus on is asking Infinite Wealth, and by extension its writers, if this method of online behavior is only good under certain circumstances, then who decides when it's beneficial and when it isn't? Who makes that judgment call, and why did they avoid making this declaration in their work? I suspect it's because of two reasons. One, RGG Studios has recently developed a nasty habit of building up a message without punctuating it to avoid claims it's saying anything definitive about particular issues. And two, it's not actually saying anything about cancel, outrage, or blacklist culture. It's merely using the concepts as a plot device. Similar to how it treats the Daidoji, if cancel culture needs to be the villain for this story beat, then it's the villain. If it needs to be what saves the day, then it saves the day. It simply doesn't make any concrete statements about it besides showing how harmful it is while ignoring the very real context surrounding it. So at worst, it really is men being afraid of being held accountable for their misdeeds, and at best, isn't saying anything about it at all. Take your pick. Overall, I can't say Infinite Wealth is a bad experience if you're just interacting with it on a surface level. It's a fun RPG with neat mechanics despite a lot of the side content being pretty underwhelming in the long run. But why should you only interact with it on a surface level? Clearly, the writing wants you to garner certain feelings towards particular issues and come away from the story with a newfound perspective. Why else would you tell a story with obvious real-world connections? Why would you end it on another statement about crowd mentalities and influencer culture? What would be the point of all the technophobia-themed sub-stories and pieces of the main scenario? Infinite Wealth invites its players to examine it with a critical eye and falls apart underneath the scrutiny. It shies away from saying anything definitive about the topics it wants to address, and erring on the side of caution ends up reinforcing detrimental ideas about imperialism and, bizarrely, cults. Anyway, I'd put it in the B tier. Yeah, wrap your heads around this tier list, why don't ya? Oh, GC hates the Like a Dragon games. I hate your mom.
Barracuda.